In the heart of the New Mexico desert, where the sun scorches the earth and secrets lie buried beneath ancient sand, one man's act of compassion would forever change humanity's destiny. Jake Morrison, a weathered cowboy living on the edge of civilization, never believed in aliens until the night a mysterious craft crashed near his ranch and a dying extraterrestrial mother placed her child in his trembling hands. What seemed like a simple act of mercy would trigger an event that military leaders, scientists, and world governments could never have predicted. Within 24 hours, the sky would darken with 200 alien warships, each one capable of reducing Earth to ashes. But were they coming for war, or for something far more profound? This is the story of how one cowboy's humanity became the bridge between two worlds, and how a single choice made under the desert stars would determine whether our planet would face annihilation or salvation. The truth is stranger than any fiction, and what happened next would test everything we thought we knew about courage, parenthood, and our place in the universe. The wind howled through the arroyos of the New Mexico Badlands as Jake Morrison guided his horse back toward the ranch house. The sun had long since set, painting the sky in deep purples and blacks, and the temperature had dropped 20 degrees in what felt like minutes. At 53 years old, Jake had spent most of his life in this unforgiving landscape, working cattle on land that had been in his family for 4 generations. His face was a map of hard, years-deep lines carved by sun and wind, a scar above his left eyebrow from a bull that had nearly killed him 10 years back, and eyes that had seen too much loss to be surprised by much anymore. His wife Sarah had passed 3 years ago from cancer, and his only son had moved to Dallas, swallowed up by city life and a corporate job that Jake could never quite understand. Now it was just him, 1,500 acres of scrubland, 200 head of cattle, and a border collie named Scout, who was getting too old for the work but refused to retire. The isolation suited Jake fine most days. Out here, the problems were simple: fix a fence, treat a sick calf, find water. Nothing like the complicated mess the world had become. But tonight felt different. Scout had been agitated all evening, whining and pacing in circles, his ears pinned back like he was expecting thunder. The cattle were restless too, bunched up in the northwest pasture instead of spread out grazing like they should be. Jake had learned long ago to trust when animals acted strange. They sensed things humans couldn't, registered frequencies and pressure changes that flew right past human perception. He was still 2 miles from the ranch house when he saw a streak of light cutting across the sky, far too low and fast to be a plane. It wasn't the smooth arc of a meteorite either. This thing was moving erratically, zigzagging like a drunk driver on the highway, leaving a trail of green and purple fire in its wake. Jake pulled his horse to a stop and watched as the object descended rapidly toward a mesa about 3 miles east of his property line. The impact was silent at first. Then a low rumble rolled across the desert floor, strong enough that Jake felt it in his chest. Scout barked once, sharp and urgent. A column of black smoke rose into the night sky, illuminated from below by flickering orange light. "Easy, boy," Jake muttered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to the dog or the horse. Every instinct told him to turn around and head home. Call the sheriff. Let someone else deal with whatever had just crashed out there. But there was something else tugging at him: curiosity, maybe, or the same stubborn independence that had kept him on this land when everyone else had sold out to developers. He turned his horse toward the crash site. The terrain was rough, full of rocks and hidden gullies that could break a horse's leg in the dark, so he went slow. Scout ranged ahead, nose to the ground, more alert than Jake had seen him in months. The closer they got, the stranger things felt. The air tasted metallic, like licking a battery, and Jake's skin prickled with static electricity. His compass, which he always carried in his shirt pocket, spun lazily in circles, unable to find north. When they finally reached the mesa's base, Jake dismounted and tied his horse to a sturdy juniper. The animal's eyes were wide, nostrils flaring. "I'll be back," Jake promised, checking his rifle, a Winchester Model 70 that had belonged to his grandfather. Not that he expected to need it, but old habits died hard. The crash site was on the far side of the mesa, accessible only by a narrow trail that switchbacked up the rocky face. Jake climbed carefully, his boots finding purchase on stones smoothed by centuries of wind. When he crested the ridge and looked down into the shallow valley beyond, his breath caught in his throat. The craft was unlike anything he'd ever seen not built. Exactly, but grown, like it had been shaped from some living metal that flowed and curved without seams or joints. It was roughly egg-shaped, about the size of his pickup truck, and its surface rippled with colors that had no names, shifting between states of matter that seemed to violate every law of physics Jake remembered from high school. Parts of it were buried in the sand and rock, and a wide gash in its side leaked a luminescent fluid that hissed and steamed where it touched the ground. Jake approached slowly, the rifle held loose in his hands. The heat radiating from the craft was intense but not unbearable, and as he got closer, he heard something that made his heart clench, a sound that was universal across species, across worlds. Someone was crying. He peered through the gash in the hull and saw them. Two figures, clearly not human, but humanoid enough that Jake's brain could process what he was seeing. The larger one, the mother he somehow knew instantly, was pinned beneath a collapsed section of the craft's interior. Her skin was a deep azure blue, smooth and slightly luminescent, and she had large eyes that took up nearly a third of her face. Eyes that were a brilliant gold and filled with agony and desperation. She was badly injured, her lower body crushed, dark blood or something like blood pooling beneath her. But it was the child that drew Jake's attention. Small, no bigger than a human toddler, with the same blue skin and golden eyes, crying in a high-pitched wail that sounded almost musical. The child was uninjured but terrified, pressed against the far wall of the craft, reaching for its mother who could no longer reach back. The mother's eyes locked onto Jake's, and in that moment, species and language and everything that separated them didn't matter. She was a mother dying, and she needed help. She moved one arm. It took enormous effort. Jake could see and gestured toward the child, then toward Jake, then made a pushing motion toward the open desert. The message was crystal clear. Take my child. Save my child. Jake had about 5 seconds to make a decision that would alter the course of human history. Every rational part of his brain screamed warnings, unknown pathogens, government intervention, his own safety. But none of that mattered when he looked into those golden eyes and saw the same desperate love that any mother would have, human or otherwise. He set down his rifle and crawled into the craft. The interior of the ship was impossibly larger than the exterior suggested, as if space itself bent and folded inside its walls. Jake didn't have time to process the impossibility of it. He focused on the child. Up close, he could see that the little alien was wearing something like clothing, a one-piece garment that seemed to shift colors with its mood, currently pulsing with dark reds and purples that Jake instinctively understood meant fear. "Hey there, little one," Jake said softly, using the same gentle tone he'd used with his own son when he was small. "I'm not gonna hurt you." The child stopped crying for a moment, those huge golden eyes studying Jake with an intelligence that was startling. Then it looked back at its mother and let out another wail, reaching for her with small hands that had 4 fingers instead of 5. Jake turned to the mother. She was fading fast. He'd seen enough death on the ranch to recognize it. Her breathing was shallow and irregular, and the light in her eyes was dimming. She spoke then, her voice like wind chimes and water, words in a language that Jake couldn't understand but that somehow conveyed meaning anyway. She was telling him about her child, he realized. Telling him things a parent would want a caretaker to know, how to comfort them, what frightened them, how precious they were. The craft shuddered violently, and more debris fell from the ceiling. Whatever was keeping this thing together was failing. Jake made his decision. He moved toward the child, extending his weathered, calloused hand slowly, non-threateningly. The child pressed back against the wall, but Jake kept talking. That same low, soothing voice. "I know you're scared. I know you want your mama. But we gotta go, little one. This place isn't safe anymore." He reached the child and carefully, gently, picked it up. It was surprisingly light, no heavier than a human toddler, and warm to the touch. The child struggled for a moment, then seemed to understand that Jake meant no harm. It turned in his arms to look back at its mother one last time. The mother raised her hand, such a simple gesture, but it took everything she had left. She touched her child's face, and then she touched Jake's weathered cheek. In that touch, Jake felt something pass between them. Not quite words, not quite images, but a pure transfer of emotion and understanding. She was entrusting him with the most precious thing in her universe. She was thanking him. She was saying goodbye. Then her hand fell, and the light went out of her eyes. Jake stood there for a moment, the weight of what had just happened settling onto his shoulders like a physical burden. The child in his arms began to cry again, softly this time, a sound of grief that transcended species. Jake held the little alien close to his chest, one hand supporting its back, and whispered, "I got you. I got you now." The craft shuddered again, more violently. Jake didn't look back at the mother's body as he climbed out through the gash in the hull. He couldn't. Some things would haunt him later, when he had time to process them. Getting down the mesa with the child was harder than climbing up had been. The little alien clung to Jake's shirt with surprising strength, its face pressed against his chest, and Jake had to use one hand to keep it secure while the other grabbed rocks and roots for balance. Scout was waiting at the bottom, and to Jake's surprise, the dog approached the alien child without aggression, sniffing curiously before giving it a gentle lick on one small blue hand. The ride back to the ranch was slow and surreal. Jake kept the child tucked inside his jacket, sheltered from the cold desert night. It had stopped crying but trembled constantly, and Jake found himself humming an old lullaby Sarah used to sing to their son. Somehow, it seemed to help. The child's trembling lessened, and it made a soft sound like a purr. By the time they reached the ranch house, Jake's mind was racing with questions and concerns. What did this child eat? Could it breathe Earth's atmosphere long-term, or was each breath poisoning it slowly? Would there be others coming to look for it? And the biggest question, what was he supposed to do now? He carried the child inside and set it gently on the couch. Under the electric lights, he could see more details. The child's skin wasn't uniformly blue. It had patterns like tattoos or birthmarks, swirls of darker and lighter shades that seemed to shift slightly when he was looking directly at them. Its eyes were remarkable, the golden irises flecked with amber and copper, and there was an awareness in them that was almost frightening in its depth. "You hungry?" Jake asked and felt ridiculous. What would an alien child even eat? But the child seemed to understand the question, or at least the intent behind it. It nodded an almost human gesture and pointed toward the kitchen. Jake carried it in and opened the refrigerator, letting the child look. To his amazement, it pointed directly at a bottle of water and then at some strawberries he bought at the grocery store 3 days ago. He gave the child both. It drank the water normally enough, though it used both hands to hold the bottle. The strawberries made its eyes widen with what Jake could only interpret as delight. It ate them carefully, one at a time, making that purring sound again. Jake sat at the kitchen table and watched the alien child eat strawberries in his kitchen at 2 in the morning, and the sheer absurdity of it all hit him like a physical blow. Yesterday morning, his biggest concern had been a section of fence that needed repair. Now he was harboring an extraterrestrial orphan, and he had no idea what would happen next. He didn't have to wait long to find out. At 5:47 a.m., just as the first light of dawn was painting the eastern sky pink and gold, Jake's entire property began to vibrate. Every window rattled in its frame. Every dish in the cupboard clinked against its neighbor. Scout started barking frantically, and the child, who had fallen asleep on the couch, wrapped in one of Sarah's old quilts, woke up with a start. Jake ran outside and looked up at the sky, and what he saw there made his knees weak. They were everywhere ships, hundreds of them, appearing out of nothing as if reality itself was tearing open to let them through. They weren't like the small craft that had crashed. These were massive, each one the size of a city block, black and angular and radiating such a sense of power and purpose that Jake felt like an ant staring up at a boot that was about to fall. He counted them as they appeared, one after another, filling the sky until the rising sun was blocked out and the desert fell back into twilight. When the last one materialized, Jake had counted exactly 200. 200 alien warships hovering over the New Mexico desert, directly above his ranch. And Jake Morrison, a widowed cowboy who just wanted to fix his fences and take care of his cattle, was standing in the middle of it all with an alien child clinging to his leg, both of them looking up at an invasion force that could turn Earth to glass in seconds. The child tugged on Jake's pant leg and said something in that musical, wind chime language. Jake didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. The child wasn't scared of the ships. It was relieved. They had come for it. But as Jake would soon discover, they had come for much more than that. The military response was swift and overwhelming. Within 2 hours, Jake's ranch was surrounded by more armed personnel, vehicles, and equipment than he'd ever seen in his life. Apache helicopters circled overhead. Fighter jets screamed across the sky at regular intervals. And tanks, actual tanks, were dug into positions on every hill within 5 miles of his property. A command center had been erected in what used to be his north pasture, a massive tent city filled with communications equipment, weapon systems, and enough brass to start their own army. Jake sat in his kitchen with the alien child. He started calling it Little One in his head, for lack of a better name, surrounded by men in expensive suits and military uniforms covered in medals. The highest-ranking one, a 4-star general named Hawthorne, was a tall man with steel gray hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen things that would break most people. He'd been mostly polite so far, but Jake could see the tension in every line of his body. "Mr. Morrison," General Hawthorne said, his voice clipped and professional, "I need you to understand the gravity of this situation. We have 200 alien vessels in our atmosphere, weapon systems that make our most advanced technology look like stone axes. And the only thing standing between us and potential annihilation is apparently you and that child. So I'm going to ask you one more time, what exactly happened last night?" Jake had already told the story 3 times, but he told it again, patiently, while Little One sat in his lap eating more strawberries. The child seemed remarkably calm given the circumstances, occasionally looking up at the men in uniforms with curiosity rather than fear. It had also started making small sounds that Jake was beginning to recognize. A chirp meant yes, a lower hum meant no, and a particular trill seemed to mean, "I want that." When Jake finished his account, one of the suits, a woman from the State Department named Dr. Patricia Chen, leaned forward. "Mr. Morrison, has the child communicated anything about why those ships are here? What they want?" "It doesn't speak English, ma'am," Jake said, adjusting Little One's position in his lap. The child immediately snuggled closer to him, one small hand gripping his shirt. In the 12 hours they'd been together, they'd formed a bond that surprised Jake with its strength. The kid trusted him completely, and Jake found himself feeling protective in a way he hadn't felt since his own son was small. "But there must be some way to communicate," pressed another suit, this one from the CIA. "A body language, gestures, something." Before Jake could answer, all hell broke loose. Alarms started blaring throughout the command center outside, and every phone in the kitchen started ringing at once. General Hawthorne snatched up the nearest one. listened for exactly 3 seconds, and went pale. "The ships are moving," he said. "They're descending. All of them. Converging on this location." Through the kitchen window, Jake could see it happening. The massive black ships, which had been hovering at an altitude of about 20,000 feet, were dropping lower, their shadows casting his entire property into darkness. The sound they made was like nothing Jake had ever heard, a deep thrumming that resonated in his bones and made his teeth ache. Little one made a sound, a high, clear note that cut through all the chaos like a bow. Then the child did something extraordinary. It stood up on the kitchen table, spread its small arms wide, and its skin began to glow. Not the subtle luminescence Jake had noticed before, but a brilliant, pure white light that filled the entire room and spilled out through the windows. Nobody move. General Hawthorne ordered, but his hand was on his sidearm, and every soldier in the room had their weapons raised. "Don't you dare," Jake growled, stepping between the guns and the child. "That baby just lost its mother. You're not going to shoot it in my kitchen." The standoff might have turned violent, but at that moment, something happened that would become one of the most documented events in human history. A beam of light, silver blue and impossibly pure, descended from the largest ship directly overhead and touched down in Jake's front yard, about 50 feet from the house. And in that beam of light, a figure materialized. She was tall 7 feet at least, and her skin was the same azure blue as Little One's, but marked with intricate patterns that glowed with soft light. She wore no clothing that Jake could identify, but she was clearly female, clearly regal, and clearly in charge. Her golden eyes swept across the assembled military might surrounding Jake's ranch with what could only be described as amused contempt, like a mother looking at children playing with toy guns. Then her eyes found the kitchen window, found Little One still glowing on the table, and her face transformed with such raw emotion that Jake felt it in his chest. Relief, joy, grief, and a love so powerful it transcended species and language. She moved then, not walking but flowing, crossing the 50 feet to the house in seconds. The front door didn't slow her down, she simply passed through it like it wasn't there. And suddenly she was in Jake's kitchen, this magnificent alien being, and the small child was flying through the air into her arms. The reunion was beautiful and heartbreaking to witness. The tall alien held Little One close, making sounds that were clearly words in their language, checking the child over for injuries, covering its face with what had to be kisses. Little One was crying and laughing simultaneously, that musical voice rising and falling as it babbled in its native tongue. Every weapon in the room was trained on the alien woman, but she didn't seem to notice or care. She was completely focused on the child, and for a long moment, nothing else in the universe mattered to her. Then she looked up and her eyes met Jake's. The intensity of that gaze nearly knocked him backward. She stepped toward him, still holding the child, and Jake's military escort immediately raised their weapons higher. "Stand down," Jake snapped at them. "She's got her baby back. She's not gonna hurt anyone." The alien woman stopped directly in front of Jake. She was so tall he had to crane his neck to look up at her. She studied his face for a long moment, those golden eyes seeming to see right through him to whatever made him who he was. Then she did something that made every jaw in the room drop. She knelt. This obviously powerful being, this representative of a species that had 200 warships in Earth's atmosphere, knelt before a cowboy in a kitchen in New Mexico. She placed one hand over her heart and bowed her head. And even though Jake didn't understand the gesture's specific cultural meaning, he understood the universal truth of it. She was thanking him. More than that, she was honoring him. Little One wriggled in her arms and reached for Jake, making insistent sounds. The woman listened, and her eyes widened slightly. She looked at Jake again, and this time there was something new in her expression. Respect. Yes, but also something that looked like hope. She stood, adjusted the child in her arms, and then she spoke. The language was impossible, beautiful, and alien, But as she spoke, Jake realized he could understand her, not the words themselves, but their meaning, transmitted directly into his mind through some technology or ability he couldn't comprehend. "You saved my daughter," she said, and her voice was like music and thunder combined. "You found her in the wreckage of her mother's ship. You could have left her to die. You could have feared her. Instead, you showed her kindness. You fed her. You comforted her. You protected her even when warriors aimed weapons at her." Jake swallowed hard. "Any decent person would have done the same, ma'am. Would they?" she asked, and there was profound sadness in her voice. "We have visited many worlds, human. We have met many species. Most would have seen my daughter as a threat, an opportunity, or a curiosity to be studied. You saw a frightened child who needed help. For that alone, I am in your debt. My people are in your debt." General Hawthorne found his voice. "Who are you? What do you want with Earth?" The alien woman turned to face him, and her expression hardened. "I am Zarakai, High Commander of the Collective Fleet. My daughter's mother was my sister. She was on a scientific mission, studying your world's desert ecosystems, when her ship experienced catastrophic failure. She crashed, and she died, and my niece, the last of my sister's bloodline, should have died with her. But she didn't," Jake said quietly, "because your sister trusted me to take care of her." "Yes," Zarakai said, turning back to him. "My sister read your essence in those final moments. She saw your truth. And she made a choice that will alter the relationship between our species forever." She looked around the kitchen, at the armed soldiers, at the general and the suits from various alphabet agencies, and her expression grew stern. "We detected the crash immediately. We came as fast as our technology allows, expecting to find two bodies and a situation that would require unfortunate measures to protect our security. Instead, we found something none of us anticipated. We found hope." "Hope?" Dr. Chun asked, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. "Hope for what?" "Hope that humanity might be different," Zarakai answered. "That you might be ready." "Ready for what?" General Hawthorne demanded. Zarakai looked down at her daughter, who was now calm and content, secure in her aunt's arms but still reaching occasionally toward Jake, wanting his attention. "Ready to stop being alone in the universe," she said softly. "Ready to join the greater community of worlds. Ready to be tested not with weapons or technology, but with the only thing that truly matters, your capacity for compassion toward those who are different from you." She looked directly at Jake. "My sister's ship did not crash by accident. Its failure was orchestrated by forces within the collective who believe humanity is too violent, too divided, too dangerous to be contacted. They sabotaged her ship to create an incident that would justify eliminating your species before you could spread beyond your solar system. They believed no human would help an alien child. They believed you would prove yourselves unworthy through your own actions." The room was dead silent. Jake felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "You mean ... this was a test?" "No," Zarakai said firmly. "My sister's death was murder, and those responsible will face justice. But yes, what happened next became a test. Not one I designed or wanted, but a test nonetheless. And in the darkness of that desert, in the wreckage of that ship, you made a choice that saved more than my daughter's life." She gestured toward the ceiling, toward the 200 warships hovering overhead. "Half of this fleet believes humans are too dangerous to live. They wanted to come here to verify the child's death and then sterilize your planet. The other half believed humans deserve a chance, that you are capable of growth and change. We have argued this question for 3 of your years as we debated whether to make contact. Last night, we received our answer. A human, a simple rancher with no technology, no preparation, no reason to help, risked his life to save an alien child. That one act of compassion has changed everything." General Hawthorne's face was ashen. "So what happens now?" Zarakai's smile was small but genuine. Now we talk. Now we begin the long process of integration. Now, humanity learns it is not alone, and the collective gains a new member species. If you prove worthy of the gift my sister and this man have given you. She turned back to Jake and gently transferred her daughter back into his arms. The child went willingly, immediately snuggling against his chest. My daughter has chosen you as kin, Zarakai said. In our culture, that is a bond not easily broken. Would you accept the responsibility of being her guardian, her connection to your species, while she lives on your world? Jake looked down at little one, at this child from another world who had lost her mother and found comfort in his arms, and thought about his own losses, his own isolation, the empty rooms in his house that had been silent for too long. Yes, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Yes, I'd be honored. Zarakai placed her hand on Jake's shoulder, and in that touch, he felt the weight of history shifting, felt the moment crystallizing into something that would be remembered for as long as humans survived. Then let this be the first bond between our peoples, she said. Born not from treaties or technology, but from the simple truth that kindness transcends all boundaries. Outside, the 200 warships began to rise, ascending back to their original altitude. The invasion that never was ended not with fire and destruction, but with a cowboy holding an alien child in a kitchen in New Mexico, while the fate of two worlds hung in the balance of one man's capacity to care. But the story was far from over. The real challenges were just beginning. The next 3 months were unlike anything Earth had ever experienced. First contact wasn't clean or simple. It was messy, complicated, and filled with more problems than solutions. The United Nations convened emergency sessions that lasted for weeks. World leaders who'd been enemies for decades suddenly had to cooperate on an unprecedented scale. Religious institutions struggled to reconcile their teachings with the reality of alien life. Scientists worked around the clock to understand technology that seemed like magic. And conspiracy theorists went absolutely wild, flooding the internet with theories that ranged from plausible to completely insane. Through it all, Jake Morrison remained at the center of it all, like the eye of a hurricane. His ranch had been transformed into an unofficial embassy, the neutral ground where human and collective representatives could meet without the weight of formal politics crushing every interaction. Zarakai had insisted on it, and after some initial resistance, world governments had agreed. After all, Jake was the one the alien child officially named Kira in collective language trusted completely. Jake's quiet life was thoroughly shattered. His property was now protected by a joint force of human military and collective guardians, tall, silent warriors who never seemed to sleep and could move faster than human eyes could track. The media camped outside his gates 24/7, and he couldn't step outside without 100 cameras pointed at him. His phone rang constantly until he finally just unplugged it. The only peace he got was inside the house, in the evenings, when it was just him, Kira, and Scout. Kira was thriving despite the chaos. She'd adapted to Earth's environment remarkably well, and the collective's medical experts who'd set up a facility in Jake's barn, much to his initial dismay, confirmed she was healthy. She was learning English at an astonishing rate, already able to string together simple sentences, though she still preferred her native language when talking to her aunt or other collective members. But most importantly, she bonded with Jake in a way that surprised everyone, including him. She followed him everywhere, helped him with ranch chores in her own small way, and insisted on sleeping in the guest room next to his bedroom. She called him JJ because she couldn't quite pronounce Jake yet, and the sound of her musical voice calling his name had become the best part of his days. Yet beneath the surface of this tentative peace, tensions were building. The faction within the collective that had opposed contact with humanity hadn't given up. They'd just gone quiet, which was somehow more worrying. And on Earth, not everyone was happy with the new reality. Extremist groups had formed, some demanding that the aliens leave, others worrying that humanity would lose its independence. There had been 3 assassination attempts on Zarakai, all thwarted by collective security and countless threats against Jake and Kira. The real crisis began on a Tuesday morning in late autumn. Jake was teaching Kira how to feed the chickens. She found them absolutely fascinating and wanted to study every aspect of their behavior when Zarakai arrived via transport beam, materializing in the yard with an expression that made Jake's stomach drop. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "A significant faction of my fleet has declared me compromised by human sentiment. They're demanding a trial by combat for leadership of the collective forces currently in your system." Jake handed the feed bucket to Kira, who continued her chicken observations, oblivious to the bomb her aunt had just dropped. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Zarakai said, her jaw tight, "that I must fight their champion to maintain command. If I lose, the new commander will have the authority to order a withdrawal from Earth. And given who's behind this challenge, withdrawal is the best-case scenario. Eradication is more likely. Can you beat their champion?" Zarakai's laugh was bitter. "Their champion is Torvin, my own second-in-command. He trained me, Jake. He taught me everything I know about combat. He's older, stronger, and is twice my experience." She paused, watching Kira scatter feed to the eager chickens. "But more than that, he genuinely believes humanity is a threat. He sees your kindness to my niece as an isolated incident, not a reflection of your species' potential. He thinks I've allowed maternal sentiment to cloud my judgment. When's the fight?" 3 days. It will be broadcast to the entire collective billions of beings across hundreds of worlds, as well as to Earth. The stakes couldn't be higher. If I fall, everything we've built these past months collapses. Jake thought for a moment, watching Kira laugh as a particularly bold hen pecked seeds from her palm. "What if you don't fight alone?" Zarakai frowned. "Combat trials are individual. I don't mean physically fighting alongside you," Jake interrupted. "I mean, look, I don't know collective customs, but I know humans. We don't trust people who never fail, who never struggle. We trust people who face impossible odds and keep fighting. If you're trying to prove that humans are worth the risk, maybe you need to show your people what humanity is really about. Not perfection, but resilience. Not strength, but courage." Over the next 3 days, Jake's ranch became a stage for something unprecedented. Zarakai trained in the open, where both her supporters and detractors could watch. But Jake had suggested something else. Interspersed with her combat training, she participated in human activities. She helped Jake repair a fence. She learned to cook a simple meal. She played with Kira and Scout. She sat on the porch at sunset and talked with Jake about loss and responsibility and the weight of leadership. It was all broadcast live, both to the collective fleet and to Earth. Billions of beings watched a powerful warrior commander do mundane, domestic tasks alongside a cowboy, and something shifted in the collective consciousness. The collective members began to see humans not as primitives or threats, but as people flawed, mortal, but genuine in their emotions and connections. Humans, meanwhile, watched one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy humble herself to learn from them, and it changed something in how they viewed the aliens. Fear began to transform into curiosity, hostility into cautious openness. But not everyone was swayed. Torvin and his supporters grew more vocal in their opposition, and intelligence reports suggested they were planning something beyond the combat trial. Zarakai shared these concerns with Jake late one night as they sat on his porch. The sky above them filled with alien ships that no longer seemed quite so alien. "There are weapons on 3 of the ships under Torvan's command," she said quietly. "Planetary sterilization arrays. If he wins the trial, those weapons could be activated within minutes. Your planet would be ash before your governments could even respond." Jake sipped his coffee, old hands steady despite the enormity of what he was hearing. "Then you can't lose. I'm trying not to, Zarakai said with a wry smile. But Torvin is formidable. Even with the sympathy we've built, if I fall, there may not be enough support to stop him from acting. The collective values strength above all else. A defeated commander's wishes carry little weight. What if you could show strength in a different way? What do you mean? Jake set down his coffee cup and looked up at the stars. You've spent 3 days showing your people that connecting with humans doesn't make you weak. But maybe what they need to see is that our connection makes you stronger. That having something worth protecting, someone worth fighting for, is its own kind of power. Zarakai looked through the window at Kira, sleeping peacefully in the guest room, curled up with Scout at the foot of her bed. You think I should make the trial about her? About what we stand to lose if we abandon this connection? I think you should make it about the truth, Jake said. Your sister died believing in the best of humanity. Her daughter found that belief validated. You've spent months building bridges between our peoples. Torvin wants to burn those bridges because he's afraid of change. Afraid of being wrong. Afraid of what it means if a primitive species can teach the mighty collective something about compassion. He won't see it that way. Then make him see it. Make everyone see it. Jake stood, stretching his back with a wince. I'm just a rancher, so maybe I'm wrong. But in my experience, the hardest fights aren't won with fists. They're won with the courage to stand for something bigger than yourself, even when it would be easier to walk away. Zarakai sat in silence for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're right, and I know what I have to do. The day of the trial arrived with Earth and the collective holding their collective breath. A massive arena had been constructed in orbit, visible from the ground as a bright point of light that eclipsed even Venus. Zarakai would fight Torvin there, in front of representatives from both worlds, and broadcast to billions more. Jake wasn't allowed to go. Humans couldn't survive in the arena-S environment without extensive modifications, but he watched from the ranch along with Kira and what felt like the entire planet. The little alien girl sat in his lap, nervous in a way he'd never seen her before. Her skin flickering between colors that Jake had learned indicated anxiety. Your aunt's going to be okay, Jake told her, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it. What if she's not? Kira asked in her accented English, her golden eyes turned up to his face. What if Torvin wins and makes everyone leave? I don't want to leave you, JJ. You're my family now, too. Jake hugged her close, his weathered heart breaking a little. Whatever happens, little one, I promise you'll be okay. Your aunt loves you too much to let anything bad happen to you. On the screen, the trial began. The arena was massive, a sphere of energy containing an environment that shifted and changed, gravity fluctuating, terrain morphing, obstacles appearing and disappearing. It was designed to test every aspect of a warrior's abilities, and it was brutal. Torvin was exactly as intimidating as Zarakai had described. Larger than her by half, covered in battle scars that marked centuries of combat, he moved with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight that mattered. His opening attack was ferocious, a combination of physical combat and energy manipulation that would have killed a human instantly. But Zarakai had learned something in her months on Earth, something Torvin hadn't anticipated. She fought not with rage or pride, but with purpose. Every move she made was efficient, economical, conserving energy for the long battle ahead. She wasn't trying to dominate, she was trying to endure. The fight lasted 3 hours, an eternity in collective combat trials. Torvin grew increasingly frustrated as Zarakai refused to engage in the kind of direct power confrontation he excelled at. She dodged, redirected, used the arena's changing environment to her advantage, and most importantly, she talked. You taught me that a warrior fights for something greater than glory, she said, her voice carrying across the arena and to every viewer. You taught me that true strength is protecting those who cannot protect themselves. I'm fighting now to protect humanity from your fear, Torvin. Not because they're perfect, but because they deserve the chance to prove they can be better. They're weak. Torvin roared, landing a blow that sent Zarakai crashing into an energy barrier. They fight among themselves. They destroy their own world. They would have left my child to die if not for one anomalous individual. Zarakai rose, bloodied but unbroken. One individual who represents billions more like him. I've walked among them, Torvin. I've seen their capacity for growth. Yes, they're flawed. Yes, they struggle. But they're also capable of incredible compassion, of changing their minds, of reaching across divides to help those different from themselves. Isn't that exactly what the collective claims to value? Isn't that what we're supposed to represent to younger species? The battle shifted. Zarakai went on the offensive, not with brutal power but with technique and intelligence. She used everything Torvin had taught her, turned his own strategies against him, and slowly, methodically, began to wear him down. But the real turning point came when Torvin, desperate and furious, made a critical error. He tried to access the weapon systems on his ships, to threaten the trial's outcome by holding Earth hostage. It was a violation of every collective law regarding combat trials, a dishonorable act that revealed the depth of his fear and hatred. Zarakai didn't even have to expose him. The trial's arbitrators detected the attempt immediately and broadcasted it to every viewer. The collective representatives recoiled in horror. Honor was everything to their culture, and Torvin had just shattered his. In that moment, with his dishonor revealed and his strength failing, Torvin made one final, desperate attack. He charged Zarakai with everything he had left, intending to kill her even if it meant his own death. Zarakai could have dodged, could have let him exhaust himself and fall. But instead, she did something that would be remembered for generations. She caught him, used his own momentum to redirect him safely to the ground. And then she knelt beside him and offered him her hand. "I don't need to defeat you to prove my point," she said softly. "I need to show you that strength and compassion aren't opposites. They're partners. The humans taught me that. Let me teach it to you." Torvin stared at her hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he took it. The fight was over. Back on Earth in a ranch house in New Mexico, Jake Morrison held an alien child while she cried tears of relief, and he felt something he hadn't felt since. Sarah died hope for the future, not just his own, but for everyone. The weeks following the trial brought rapid change. Torvin's attempted weapons activation had shocked the collective to its core. Within days, he and his co-conspirators were removed from command and placed under investigation for conspiracy to commit genocide. The faction opposing human contact didn't disappear. Change never comes that easily, but they lost their most powerful voice and their moral authority. More significantly, public opinion across the collective had shifted. The trial and Zarakai's mercy had resonated with billions of beings. Humanity's story, flawed but striving, capable of both terrible violence and profound kindness, became something the collective could relate to rather than fear. They began to see Earth not as a threat to be eliminated or a curiosity to be studied, but as a younger sibling species that needed guidance, not judgment. On Earth, the changes were even more dramatic. The reality of not being alone in the universe forced humanity to confront questions it had been avoiding for centuries. Nations that had been at each other's throats found common ground in navigating first contact. Religious leaders engaged in unprecedented dialogue about what alien life meant for their faiths. Scientists and collective researchers began collaborating on projects that would have been impossible just months ago. But the most profound changes happened in quieter places, in individual hearts and minds. People watched Jake Morrison, an ordinary rancher, become humanity's representative, not through any special training or qualification, but through simple decency. They saw Kira, an alien child, playing with earth dogs and eating strawberries and laughing at cartoons. They observed Zarakai learning to make pancakes and helping repair fences. This powerful warrior commander humbling herself to understand human culture. These images did more to bridge the species gap than any treaty or technology exchange ever could. Yet not everyone was ready to embrace the new reality. Extremist groups, both human and collective, continued to plot and scheme. There were terrorist attacks. 3 humans died in a bombing at a collective cultural center in Berlin, and 2 collective researchers were killed by human supremacists in Tokyo. Each incident threatened to undo months of progress, but each time, leaders from both species condemned the violence and reaffirmed their commitment to peaceful integration. Jake found himself in the uncomfortable position of being famous without wanting any part of it. He gave exactly 1 interview to a small-town newspaper reporter he'd known for 20 years, and said simply, "I saw a child who needed help, and I helped." That's not heroism, that's just being human. We need to remember that about ourselves, especially now. That quote spread across Earth and the collective like wildfire, becoming something of a motto for the pro-integration movement. Jake was horrified by the attention, but Zarakai found it amusing. She'd become a regular presence at the ranch, coming and going several times a week to see Kira and to consult with Jake on matters of human collective relations. Their friendship had deepened into something neither of them had quite expected. Zarakai, who carried the weight of leading a massive fleet and representing her species, found peace in the simplicity of ranch life. Jake, who had been isolated in his grief for years, found purpose in helping bridge 2 worlds. They challenged each other, taught each other, and gradually became true friends, despite or perhaps because of their radical differences. Kira flourished in this environment. At what would be equivalent to 5 years old in human terms, she was precocious, curious, and had both her mother's scientific mind and her aunt's warrior spirit. She started attending a special school established for both human and collective children, the first of its kind, where kids from both species learned together. The cultural exchange that happened on that playground, in those classrooms, was perhaps the most important work being done anywhere. Jake often drove Kira to school himself, enjoying the simple routine of it. She'd chatter away in a mix of English and her native language, telling him about her friends, both human and collective, and the things she was learning. She'd ask endless questions about Earth animals, Earth weather, Earth food, and Jake would answer as best he could, marveling at how this little alien girl had become such an integral part of his life. But beneath the surface progress, tensions were building toward a crisis that would test everything they built. It started with small incidents, equipment failures at collective facilities, mysterious illnesses affecting human workers in integrated environments, data breaches that exposed sensitive information about both species' vulnerabilities. At first, these seemed like unrelated problems, growing pains of a complicated integration process. But Zarakai's intelligence officers knew better. Someone was orchestrating a campaign to destabilize human collective relations. Someone who wanted the integration to fail. And they were getting bolder. The crisis came to a head on a cold December evening. Jake was in the barn, tending to a mare that was due to foal any day, when alarms started blaring from the collective facility next door. He ran outside to see energy shields flickering and failing, collective personnel scrambling to secure their systems, and Zarakai materializing in his yard with an expression that meant serious trouble. "We've been breached," she said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Someone we don't know who yet uploaded a virus into our orbital network. It's spreading through every system, shutting down shields, weapons, propulsion. If they succeed in reaching critical systems, ships will start falling from orbit." Jake's blood ran cold. How many ships? All of them. 200 vessels, each with a crew of thousands. They'd burn up in atmosphere or crash into population centers. Millions would die, both collective and human. And any chance of integration would die with them. What do you need? Zarakai looked at him, and despite her alien features, Jake could read the fear in her eyes. The virus is sophisticated, designed specifically to exploit collective systems. We can't stop it from spreading, only slow it down. But there might be a solution, a risky one. Tell me. The virus has a weakness. It's designed around pure collective code architecture. But if we could integrate human-computer protocols, something it's not designed to recognize or attack, we might be able to create isolated, safe systems and purge the infection from there. It would require direct connection between human and collective networks, something we've deliberately avoided because of compatibility issues. Compatibility issues meaning what, exactly? Meaning there's a 70% chance the attempt will fry both systems completely, leaving us with no control of the ships at all. But if we do nothing, the virus reaches critical systems in 42 minutes, and ships start falling in 45. Jake made a decision. My son, the one who moved to Dallas. He works in cybersecurity for a major tech company. He's brilliant with this stuff, always has been, even as a kid. And double quotes. Jake paused, emotion thick in his throat. And he's been wanting to help. He called me last week, said he was proud of what I was doing, that he wanted to be part of it somehow. Zarakai nodded immediately. Get him here. Now. We'll transport him directly, no time for conventional travel. 20 minutes later, Jake's son Michael materialized in the barn, looking disoriented but determined. He was in his mid-30s now, successful and sophisticated in his city suit. But when he looked at his father, Jake saw the same earnest kid who'd once followed him around the ranch, eager to help with everything. Dad, Michael said, and they hugged, brief and awkward like always, but real. No time for catching up, Jake said. You ready to save the world? Michael's laugh was shaky. Apparently that runs in the family now. The next 20 minutes were among the most tense Jake had ever experienced. Michael worked alongside 3 collective tech specialists, their hands moving across holographic interfaces that Jake couldn't begin to understand. Kira had been brought to the barn for safety, and she clung to Jake's side, watching her aunt direct operations with quiet intensity. The virus is adaptive, Michael reported, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. Every time we block one pathway, it finds another. Whoever designed this really knew what they were doing. Can you stop it? Zarakai asked. Maybe. There's a pattern to its adaptations. It's complex, but it's still following rules. If I can figure out the algorithm, double quotes. He trailed off, his focus absolute. With 5 minutes left before critical system failure, Michael suddenly straightened. Got it. It's not a virus, it's a worm. It needs a specific activation sequence from a remote source to complete its attack. If we can trace that signal and block it, we can purge the whole infection. One of the collective techs finished, her eyes wide with understanding. But the signal could be coming from anywhere, any of the ships, any facility, even from Earth's surface. Then we triangulate, Michael said. Give me access to your sensor arrays. What followed was a collaborative effort that would become legendary human ingenuity and collective technology working in perfect harmony, racing against a ticking clock. They found the signal source with 90 seconds to spare, a stealth satellite in low Earth orbit, broadcasting on frequencies designed to go undetected. Zarakai destroyed it with a precisely targeted energy burst from her ship's weapons. The worm, suddenly cut off from its command source, became inert and was purged from collective systems within minutes. The immediate crisis was over, but its implications were just beginning to sink in. Someone had nearly succeeded in causing the largest disaster in human history. Someone with resources, knowledge, and a willingness to kill millions to stop human collective integration. As the adrenaline faded, Jake watched his son and the collective technicians celebrating their success, clasping hands and hugging across species lines. He saw Kira chattering excitedly with Michael, telling him all about school and her friends. He saw Zarakai's shoulders finally relax as the last of the infected systems came back online. And he realized that this crisis, terrifying as it had been, had also revealed something crucial. When pushed to the brink, humans and collective hadn't turned on each other. They'd worked together, trusted each other, saved each other. That night, after the immediate chaos had subsided, and Michael had reluctantly returned to Dallas, promising to visit much more often, Jake sat on his porch with Zarakai. Above them, the 200 ships that had almost fallen from the sky remained steady in their orbits, lights winking in the darkness like new constellations. "We found who was behind it," Zarakai said quietly. "A coalition of extremists from both species. Humans who wanted us gone, collective who wanted Earth destroyed. They'd been working together in secret for months, using their mutual hatred to justify mass murder. They almost succeeded, but they didn't. Because your son and my technicians proved that our species can accomplish more together than either could alone. That's the message this attack has sent to both our worlds. Not division, but unity. Not fear, but possibility." Jake sipped his coffee, old hands warm against the cold night air. "It's not going to be easy, is it? This whole integration thing." "No," Zarakai admitted. "There will be more attacks, more resistance, more people on both sides who can't accept change. But tonight proved we can face those challenges together. That's more than I dared hope for when I first arrived at your ranch." Kira appeared at the door, wearing pajamas covered in cartoon stars that had become her favorite. "JJ, I'm ready for bed. Will you read me a story?" "Course I will, little one," Jake said, standing with a wince that reminded him of his age. He looked at Zarakai. "Want to join us?" "It's a human story tonight, where the wild things are." Zarakai's smile was warm and genuine. "I'd like that very much." As they headed inside a cowboy, a collective fleet commander, and a child who bridged two worlds, Jake thought about how impossible this all would have seemed just a few months ago. How afraid he'd been when he first saw that crash. How uncertain when he'd picked up that alien child. But fear and uncertainty were just the beginning of any worthwhile journey. What came after trust, friendship, family, that was what made the journey worth taking. The hardest times were still ahead. But for now, in this moment, there was peace. And that was enough. 6 months after the crisis, Earth and the collective signed the Unity Accords, a comprehensive treaty that would govern the integration of humanity into the broader galactic community. It was a historic moment, celebrated across both civilizations, but Jake Morrison watched the ceremony on TV from his ranch, exactly where he wanted to be. The media had finally, mercifully, lost interest in him. There were newer stories now, more exciting developments. The first human ambassadors to collective worlds had been selected and trained. Joint technology development programs were yielding breakthroughs that promised to solve long-standing problems: clean energy, disease treatment, environmental restoration. Cultural exchanges were happening everywhere, from art exhibitions to athletic competitions featuring mixed human collective teams. Most importantly, ordinary people from both species were getting to know each other, breaking down prejudices and misconceptions through the simple act of interaction. The school that Kira attended had become a model, and 100 more like it were being established across the globe. Children who learned and played together, the theory went, would grow up unable to see each other as aliens or enemies, just as friends. It wasn't perfect. There were still attacks by extremists on both sides, still bitter debates about the pace and nature of integration, still cultural clashes and misunderstandings that sometimes turned violent. But the general trajectory was clear. Humanity and the collective were finding a way forward together, imperfect but genuine. Jake's ranch had evolved too. It was no longer ground zero for first contact. That distinction had moved to proper diplomatic facilities in Geneva and New York, but it remained a symbol. People still made pilgrimages to see the place where it all began, though Jake had finally gotten security to keep them from actually bothering him. He'd gone back to ranching, mostly to the simple routines that had defined his life before aliens made it complicated. The one major change was Kira. She was growing fast by both human and collective standards, becoming more confident and independent every day. She still considered Jake her guardian and lived primarily at the ranch, but she now split her time between Earth and the collective flagship, maintaining connections to both halves of her heritage. She was currently up on the flagship, spending a week with Zarakai, learning about collective military history and traditions. Jake missed her. The house felt empty without her chatter and laughter, but he was proud of the young being she was becoming. Truly bicultural, she moved between worlds with an ease that adults from both species envied. Michael had become a regular visitor, coming out from Dallas twice a month and staying for long weekends. The crisis had somehow repaired something broken between them, and they were rebuilding their relationship one conversation at a time. Michael had even started dating one of the collective technicians he de-worked with that night, a young woman named Solari who found human culture fascinating and who laughed at all of Michael's terrible jokes. Jake approved, though he teased his son mercilessly about it. On this particular evening, Jake was in the barn when he heard the familiar hum of a transport beam. He turned to see Zarakai materializing, but something was different. She wasn't in her usual warrior garb. Instead, she wore something simpler, civilian clothing that made her look less like a fleet commander and more like just herself. "Thought you had Kira for another 3 days," Jake said, setting down his tools. "I do. She's being watched by her cousins, wanted to give them bonding time." Zarakai walked over to where Jake had been working on a saddle, examining it with interest. "I came to talk to you about something. Sounds serious." "It is." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "My term as commander of the Earth Integration Fleet is ending. The collective wants me to take a position in the central government, helping establish protocols for future first contacts with other emerging species. That's a promotion, isn't it?" "Congratulations. Thank you. But it means I'll be leaving Earth's system, returning to collective space." She looked at him directly. "And I wanted to ask what that would mean for Kira. Her custody arrangement is flexible, but she's deeply bonded to you. If I'm going to be far away, no longer the nearby presence I've been ... double quotes." Jake understood what she was really asking. "You want me to be her primary guardian, officially?" "If you're willing, she'd still visit me, still maintain her collective identity and connections. But Earth would be her home, and you would be her family. It's a lot to ask." "Yes," Jake interrupted. Zarakai blinked. "Yes?" "Yes, I'll take full guardianship." "I was hoping you'd ask, actually. That girl means the world to me." He smiled, feeling emotion tighten his throat. "Lost my wife, nearly lost my relationship with my son. Thought I'd spend the rest of my days alone out here. Then this little alien kid shows up and gives me a reason to get up in the morning, a reason to care about the future. She's not my daughter. I'm not trying to replace her mother, but she's family." "That's enough." Zarakai's eyes shone with unshed tears. Jake had learned that collective did cry, though not exactly the same way humans did. "Thank you. You'll never know what this means, what you've given us. My sister died believing in the best of humanity, and you've proven her right every day since. I'm just a rancher who did what anyone should do." "No," Zarakai said firmly. "You're a bridge builder, whether you intended to be or not. You showed two species that kindness transcends all boundaries." "That's not nothing, Jake. That's everything." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Zarakai added, "There's one more thing. The collective wants to honor you officially. A ceremony, medals, the whole formal process." "They've been planning it for months," Jake groaned. "Please tell me you can get me out of it." "Not a chance. But I'll be there with you, and so will Kira. We'll get through it together. And afterward, you can come back here and never leave your ranch again, if that's what you want." "That is exactly what I want." Zarakai laughed, a warm, musical sound that filled the barn. Then that's what you'll get. You've earned peace, my friend. You've earned a quiet life. But peace, Jake was learning, was relative. 3 weeks later, he found himself in a massive collective ceremony hall aboard the flagship, wearing an uncomfortable suit that Michael had insisted he buy, surrounded by dignitaries from dozens of species and hundreds of worlds. Kira stood beside him in traditional collective formal wear, beaming with pride and occasionally whispering translations when the speeches got too technical. The ceremony was long and formal and included honors Jake didn't fully understand. But the part that mattered came when Zarakai presented him with what she explained was the highest civilian honor the collective could bestow, the Star of Unity, given only to those who had fundamentally changed the relationship between species. You did this with no weapons, no technology, no authority, Zarakai said, her voice carrying through the hall. You did this with compassion, with courage, and with the simple human decency to help a child in need. You remind us all, collective and human alike, that the highest form of strength is choosing kindness when you could choose indifference. That the bravest act is reaching across the divide when it would be easier to turn away. She pinned the star to his jacket, a beautiful thing that seemed to contain actual starlight, and the entire hall erupted in applause that went on for 5 minutes. Jake stood there, uncomfortable and proud and overwhelmed, with Kira hugging his waist and tears streaming down his weathered face. Afterward, at the reception, he was cornered by reporters from a dozen different species, all asking variations of the same question. How did it feel to be a hero? To have changed history? To have saved 2 worlds? Jake gave them all the same answer. I saw a child who needed help, and I helped. The rest of you did the saving. You chose to see past your fears and prejudices. You chose to build bridges instead of walls. I just gave you a reason to try. But one reporter, a young human woman from a small news outlet, asked a different question. What do you hope people remember about all this 100 years from now? Jake thought about it for a long moment. I hope they remember that first contact didn't happen in grand halls or through official channels. It happened in a desert, in the dark, between a dying mother and a stranger who decided to care. I hope they remember that the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of kindness. And I hope they remember that being human, truly human, means choosing compassion even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That quote would be carved in stone at the base of the monument they eventually erected, not at the ranch. Jake had absolutely refused that. But at the UN headquarters in New York, it would be taught in schools across Earth and the collective. It would become the founding principle of the Unity Accords. But for Jake, the words were just the truth as he'd lived it, no more complicated than fixing a fence or feeding cattle. Years passed. Kira grew into a remarkable young woman, the first of a generation who belonged equally to 2 worlds. She became a scientist like her mother, studying the intersection of human and collective biology, helping to solve problems that neither species could have tackled alone. But she always came home to the ranch, always called Jake for advice, always introduced him as her guardian with obvious pride. Michael and Solari got married in a ceremony that blended both cultures, and Jake stood as best man, his heart full watching his son build the kind of bridge between worlds that had started with an old cowboy and an alien child. Zarakai visited regularly, despite her demanding position in the collective government. She and Jake maintained their friendship, 2 people from impossibly different worlds who had found common ground in the most unlikely place. The ranch itself became a training ground for young diplomats from both species, not officially, but somehow people kept showing up, wanting to learn from Jake how to bridge divides. He'd put them to work, teaching them that relationships were built through shared labor and honest conversation, not through formal protocols and careful speeches. On the 10th anniversary of First Contact, Jake was interviewed by a historian documenting the events for the archives. She asked him if he'd ever regretted that night in the desert. If he'd ever wished he'd just gone home and called the authorities instead of climbing into that crashed ship. Jake looked out his kitchen window at Kira, now a poised young woman in her 20s, playing fetch with Scout's great-grandson in the yard. He watched Zarakai arrive via transport beam, immediately swept up in a hug by her niece. He saw Michael's car coming up the drive, Celery in the passenger seat. Their 2 children in the back, hybrid kids, the first of their kind, who would grow up never knowing a world where humans and collective weren't family. Regret it? Jake repeated, turning back to the historian. Not for a second. That night, I lost my isolation and my quiet life. But I gained a daughter, repaired my relationship with my son, made friends I never could have imagined. I got to see 2 species learn to understand each other, to help each other, to become better versions of themselves. He paused, emotions thick in his throat. My Sarah used to say that life's biggest blessings often come disguised as disruptions. I didn't understand what she meant until that night in the desert. Sometimes the best thing that can happen is having your whole world turned upside down, because that's when you discover what you're really made of. The historian nodded, making notes. Any final thoughts? Anything you want future generations to know? Jake smiled, watching through the window as his unlikely, impossible, beautiful family gathered on his porch. Yeah, I'd tell them that the universe is bigger and stranger and more wonderful than we ever imagined. But the basics never change: love, family, kindness, courage. Those things are universal, whether you're human or alien or something else entirely. We're not as different as we think. And when we remember that, when we choose to see each other as humanity, or whatever you want it to call that spark of consciousness and compassion, we can accomplish miracles. He stood, ending the interview. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got family waiting. And after all that's happened, I've learned never to waste a moment with the people you love. Jake Morrison walked out onto his porch, into the warm New Mexico sunset, and into the arms of his family, strange and mixed and perfect. Above them, 200 ships that had once been an invasion force now formed a protective constellation, guardians and friends. And somewhere in the desert, where it all began, a small memorial marked the place where an alien mother had died trusting humanity's best nature. She had been right to trust. And because of that trust, because of one cowboy's simple act of compassion, 2 species had found their way to each other across the vast darkness of space. The stars no longer looked quite so distant. They looked like possibilities, like promises, like home. And in a kitchen in New Mexico, at a table filled with humans and collective sharing a meal, laughing at each other's jokes, and arguing about sports and planning tomorrow's work, the future was being written one ordinary moment at a time. It was messy and complicated and imperfect. It was exactly as it should be. It was family.